Hello? I can't hear any of you. Would you like me to begin? You're all on mute, but so I'm Farrell Buller, and thank you for allowing me to join you tonight. I'm going to go ahead and walk through a presentation. I'll probably be talking for about 20 minutes or so, and then I'm going to actually ask you to participate in tonight's workshop. We're really at a critical point of this project that we're completing with San Mateo. And so let's get started. All right, so I'm thinking you can see the screen of the young lady on the playground. Maybe
Yes.
nod, I can see one there.
Can you hear us now?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. That helps. Thank you. Okay, well, thanks for having me this evening. What we're going to be walking through is what's called the SMART approach to financial sustainability in public parks and recreation. You'll learn the process that San Mateo Parks and Recreation Department is going through. And really what we're doing tonight is kind of educating you on this process and this project, because you're going to be a really critical component here in the next, I would say, couple of months, as Joanne and Nicholas start bringing recommendations forward, or kind of want to vet some ideas with you. So one of the things about this process, this is a bit unique, is it's called a cohort. And why it's a cohort is we designed this about 2 years ago. We've worked with almost 80 organizations in 12 states over the last 2 years. And participating in a cohort allows an organization to have some collegial nature, if you will, when they're working through some of the components. And at the end of the process, really to look through some decision-making lenses, right, with different project managers and directors in a same geographical region. So it also has some efficiencies from economies of scale component, like you're not paying to fly me in, right? Some of those things, a couple of the trainings we can do as a larger group. So with this California cohort, these are the 4 organizations that are currently participating: the Banning Parks and Recreation Department, Escondido Community Services Department, Lancaster Parks, Arts, Recreation, and Community Services Department, and then you all. This is our team. Just so you see, there's obviously a handful of us. I'm on the bottom left. So as I mentioned, I'm Farrell Buller. I'm here in Colorado. I've been doing project management and team training facilitation for the last couple of years full time. Prior to this role, I worked in local government here in Colorado for about 20 years, four different organizations. And then most recently, I was the Parks and Recreation Director in Erie, Colorado, followed by I became our city manager for several years. So the 110% team is at the bottom of this picture. Matt David is in the middle. He does a lot of our operations and logistics. And then Jamie Sabak. She created 110% about 13 years ago. And so that's why we study financial sustainability and resiliency, and really help organizations either become financially stable, remain financially stable, or really help position them to make great decisions in the future. At the top here of this picture are the staff at Amelia. And these gentlemen do the data. So they're really with the cost recovery tool. So Aaron and Eric have largely been working on San Mateo's data behind the scenes. So they're not here this evening, but staff have met them multiple times. Here's our agenda. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk for about 20-ish minutes, and then I'll pause. If you have any questions, please ask. You're also welcome to put them in the chat if you don't want to forget. And then we'll switch gears and move into this beneficiary of service exercise. So I'm going to walk you through the financial sustainability strategy. We're going to start really high level, kind of nationally, and some trends. We'll work into the process. What is the 3 steps that your organization is completing? Again, we'll get to that exercise. So setting the stage, just really focusing on what we're going to be talking about. We've coined it Parks and Reconomics. And really, the concept is about how public parks and recreation organizations manage their finite resources. What types of decisions are they making, right, with these allotted and allocated taxpayer dollars? And we always ask, this is a rhetorical question, are you smart about managing your money? And what we simply want people to think about is, do you know how you're spending it, right? And is it in the manner that represents your community's values, speaks to the most people, right, with the most help, where there's help needed, as well as, are you spending it in the manner that you want to? So there's no judgment. It's just really kind of organizing thought around what's happening with the dollars that are allocated to this department, as well as how do you want to position yourself for the future. We often say we're not only thinking of the residents of 2023, we're starting to help position organizations to really think about the residents and the community members of 2040, right, and 2050. We want to start with a couple of just terminology components to make sure we're all on the same page. So what is cost recovery? Right, cost recovery is simply recovering or offsetting the cost of delivering a good or service. At times, I know, especially in the public sector, cost recovery feels like a bad word, right? We're not trying to be a business. We don't want to make money and price people out. We couldn't agree more. We think cost recovery is just about what do you intend to recover to help offset the cost. And there's a lot of ways to meet cost recovery goals. Not always about the price. It could be about operating, right? It could be about participant numbers. We're going to talk about a couple of those strategies in a few minutes. A really simple exercise, if something costs $1 and you wanted to recover 75% of the cost, you would charge 75 cents. The flip side of that coin, right, the opposite side of this idea is called subsidy. So what is subsidy? Subsidy is simply a benefit given by the government, typically to remove some type of burden, and it's considered to be in the overall interest of the public good. All right. So as we move into a little bit of this context, this will probably be the quickest history lesson ever. Let me stop share and reshare for 1 second. That screen just doesn't look right to me. All right. So this will be the quickest history lesson ever, but how did Parks and Recreation begin, right? This is, again, that kind of really high level context. So this is Boston Commons, 1634, and this is where Parks and Recreation began, right? Large green spaces of people gathering, right? Participating at their leisure. You don't see programmed yoga classes. You don't see large playgrounds or swimming pools, right? This is where people gathered in green spaces, more open space, if you will, to have leisure, to enjoy each other. Maybe if things were a little bit more passive. Fast forward to the 1980s again, quickest history lesson. And in the 1980s, we kind of had this theming and this idea of becoming something for everyone. And literally, with the National Recreation and Park Association, we created this term, right? We wanted to become something for everyone in our communities. And so what we started to see in the 80s and even into the 90s, right, are large scale outdoor swimming pools and complexes. Things that used to look like a private amenity were becoming public. Playgrounds, golf courses were now part of the public system, large fitness classes, programs for the active adult and the older adult community, activities for individuals with disabilities, right? Soccer, trails, open space, parks, just all of it. And although it's really been fun, I would say, and it was really great to be able to offer so many programs and services. What's been happening is what we're going to start to look at, and that's the idea of how do we continue to offer quality amenities and facilities, right? Take care of the capital infrastructure and make sure we're providing for a community in a manner which they want, and that we've adjusted with those times right now that it's 2022. I'm going to show you just a couple of studies, again, really high level. These are from Dr. Andy Moen, who works with Penn State University, and he does studies with Parks and Recreation organizations and departments nationally. So this is called the Public Sector Balance Sheet. He completed the study in about 2014, 2015, so about 8 years ago. And what he started to see nationally was that revenues were increasing, right? You see that 1.3%. So revenues were increasing with organizations over this period of time. But already we were starting to see expenditures, right, almost double those revenue costs. So that idea of trying to keep up and take care of programs, services, facilities, be able to say yes to people in our community, there's already starting to see a significant gap. A study he did next was actually this idea of testing this hypothesis of if Parks and Recreation was really essential. And this was in about 2018, 2019. He interviewed over 800 people. And basically he wanted to see is Parks and Recreation essential, right? And although 99% of them agreed that there is a benefit to Parks and Recreation, and 6 and 7, right? Many of them agreed that Parks and Recreation is well worth the dollars it's spent on. What they all said is they would likely see Parks and Recreation departments receive funding cuts because it doesn't help with the number one thing, and that was actually economics, right? And driving economic development. So although there is significant value in it, and a lot of people used it, they would likely see funding cuts if there was budgetary pressure. So interestingly, this was in like that, 2018 period, and then what happened in 2020, right? Nobody expected there to be a national health crisis, but we did start to see significant funding cuts. Parks and Recreation departments, different in different states, but many of them received significant funding cuts. Many of them, their capital infrastructure line items were zeroed out. Staff, became minimal, if not zeroed out certain departments, right? So we just saw this huge, huge gap in funding for those couple of years. And then I wanted to share this last kind of high level scope about what happens when we think of the capital budgets, right? The infrastructure. I know, San Mateo has the 6 recreation centers, a couple of aquatic centers. They have a senior area. So really taking care of those facilities so you can continue to serve people. And the total expense on how we're really utilizing the resources. So I'm going to flip through a couple of these. What I want you to look at first are the total expenses listed across the top of these bar charts. And so you can see the total expenses, right, is 35.5 billion in 2000. It goes up, right, in 2008 to 40.7 billion. 2013, there is a decrease, right, after the first recession of 2010. The total expense is about 32.5 billion. And then when you look below that and you start to see the percentages spent on operating costs, right, day-to-day costs versus capital costs and capital infrastructure costs. And what we start to see, right, is that significant trend and that decline in putting dollars into our capital infrastructure. Those are the things, our long-term care needs for our facilities. So 2013, we were down to about 20%. We know a lot of the line items were zeroed out in 2020. We started to see some agencies come back in 2021, largely because of some of the federal funding mechanisms that are now available. 2022, we're almost to the end, believe it or not. So we're going to start to see this trend, and what's happened as those federal dollars, especially next year, start to decrease, and organizations are really expected to begin sustaining on their own with the dollars that they're allocated that they have coming in. Here's just one of the studies that NRPA did in 2020. So this was in the summer. So this was shortly after a lot of agencies started closing and changing how they were operating. And it's probably no surprise that many organizations zeroed out their capital budget. A lot of them faced significant decreases in operational changes. And we'd be remiss if I didn't say, like, hey, that's not the only thing that goes on when we talk about financial sustainability and stability within Parks and Recreation, the intersection of the conditions, all the things affecting Parks and Recreation. I'm sure as the commission, you see it, you hear it, you feel it at times, you're participating, maybe the same, maybe different, but there's a lot of things that go into our communities and their response to what we can offer and how we provide services, right? There's not only the economic uncertainty and public health crisis, different cities and states have been affected by social unrest and chaos in different ways, mind you, but the push towards not just inclusivity, but full inclusivity, right, is very different in different organizations. I would say Parks and Recreation, if there's one part in local government that's been working really hard to serve all of their people forever before it was even mandated, I do believe Parks and Recreation intentionally tries to do that on a regular basis. There's increasing disparities in need though, right? This whole idea of equality, right, versus equity, and serving people that maybe aren't as loud, right? And serving people that have a different lifestyle, a different culture background. So there's just a different need. The lack of revenue diversification at times, we think of tax dollars coming in or fees and charges. So being able to diversify some of those strategies, just like you might in your home life a little bit, your long-term planning. We see limited financial literacy. Department government budgets, they're complicated. The funding mechanisms are complicated, figuring out exactly where you are during the year, audits, it's all really complicated. It's even hard to explain to people inside the city, often frontline staff, as well as community members. We have maintenance backlogs. So most or every organization I know has some type of CIP, strategy, fund, database. They're trying to figure out how to take care of things. And at times we haven't hit pause long enough to really educate our community or educate them so that we can match their expectations with what's really going on. We've seen a lot of staffing deficiencies from full-time and part-time staff positions. And also this idea of struggling competitors and partners. And why we like to mention that is, again, going back to that idea of being something for everyone, we strongly encourage when we get to work with an organization to be cheering on, right? Competitors, small businesses, organizations that are also providing things in this life skills service sector, right? If somebody is a small business and they're providing a fitness opportunity or karate opportunity, at times that means the city doesn't have to take that on all by themselves, right? Your community members can participate and it doesn't have to be with you all the time. The other thing that does, right, is that helps feed the tax dollars and the dollars that come straight into this department to help fund it. So keeping those other organizations, those like-minded organizations in business is really beneficial. As we're starting to do this process with you all and the other organizations, one thing we like to be really mindful of is this idea of matching the reality with your policy, matching the reality of where you are and where you want to go with how that'll be practiced into the future. And those two pieces aligning is really what helps with not only great credible decision making, but also forward and advancement for your department and your budgets as a whole. The other piece that we always like to point out is many professionals in Parks and Recreation get into the profession kind of for this idea of a social service heart. I know I started out as a therapeutic recreation program coordinator. I just wanted to say yes and make life happen for people and their families that didn't believe exactly what they could be participating in. So we often know that it's not uncommon and it's not always easy to balance this idea of our social service heart kind of with that business acumen side. And it's continually a balancing act, right? We don't want to be lopsided on one component or the other. We appreciate having people with vast knowledge working in different areas, not only of the department, but of the city to bring in both perspectives. All right, are there any questions before I keep going, and we'll walk right into the exact process that you're using at San Mateo?
Questions? Okay, we can keep going, I think.
All right, cool. Okay, so one thing that I want to point out, because when I initially had the opportunity of talking to Nicholas, Joanne had not started yet, is one of the things that became evident was that I was super thankful of is San Mateo has been really diligent about tracking their dollars, organizing reports, understanding what's happening. And they also said, hey, we also know that there may be another way of doing things. We also know that there's other opportunities to go forward with. That's why they were interested in starting this process, which gosh, if we could get everybody to be just a little open-minded, like, yeah, you've probably been doing the best you can, and there's some additional resources that are newer. So I like to point that out because this tool, this process, this exact cost recovery tool, it was really created in 2018. A handful of us Parks and Recreation directors got together with the data experts, and they said, what can we build you so you can have this type of mechanism so you can figure out what's going on? So it's really pretty new, if you will, for it to be accessible to organizations. So prior to this tool, this was kind of how a lot of us functioned. It's not exactly how San Mateo is functioning, but it kind of gives you a snapshot. The cost recovery philosophy of yesteryear, we call it. This was in my textbooks in the, I don't know, late 90s of how do you do cost recovery in Parks and Recreation. And so what we started to see, and one of the people that wrote my textbooks is called Dr. John Crompton. He was the expert at the time and for many, many years. And what we started to see was these arbitrary kind of in blanket cost recovery statements, right? So parks, you should be at 0 to 10%. Youth sports, you should be at 50% cost recovery. Adult sports, 75%. Aquatics, 50%. And again, seniors, 25% cost recovery. It was a starting place. We didn't have norms for many, many years. We didn't have expectations. So benchmarking began, right? And we began benchmarking based on these numbers and based on these standards against anybody that was starting to do it. The problem is that when you benchmark, San Mateo against Austin, Texas, they're not apples to apples, right? The budgets aren't the same. The priorities may or may not be the same. The offerings in, Portland, Oregon are definitely not the same as, in Mapleton, Utah, right? Mapleton, Utah has about 2,000 people. They have a $500,000 budget. That's not the same as Portland, Oregon. So again, we were doing something, which was great. It was a great start, but we weren't really all speaking the same language. And when we said 50% cost recovery, well, nobody really went into, 50% cost recovery of what, right? Of just supplies, of part-time staff. And so that's where we're taking kind of this approach, this conventional approach and really moving it forward. So here's the process that we've started with San Mateo and that the staff have been engaging with for the last couple of months. We call it the three-legged stool. And it's really the path towards financial sustainability. So the 3 legs are service categories, beneficiary service, and cost of service. And together, all of those create kind of a stable tax investment or revenue enhancement philosophy. So what's a service category? A service category is simply any type of program, class, course, event, amenity that your organization provides. Beneficiary of service is simply who benefits from the service. And cost of service. How much does it cost for your organization to provide the service? Each leg of the stool is necessary as it builds some credibility, confidence, and attaches the current information, right, if you will, connects the dots of the current information so you can make really informed decisions. So service categories. Service categories, we're going to talk a lot about these in just a minute, but overall, service categories are really, when we move from this lens of these activities, right, going from like type to like purpose. And what I mean by that is like type would be if we were breaking apart and bucketing activities and things like all youth sports, all older adults, all dance or culture programs. That would be like type. When we move into this idea of like purpose, what we would actually say is, wow, this little boy is in a T-ball class. That's a learn to class. It's a beginner level activity, right? The older adults in a learn to swim class. It's a beginner level of activity. There's not a high level of skill necessary to participate. And the little girl is in an intro to ballet class. So old lens, right? Old or more conventional philosophy is that these would have different cost recovery goals based on the activity type. When we move into this idea of like purpose, what you're going to start to see is that all of these types of classes would actually be in the same service category. So there's a similar purpose, beginner level, right, or intro level. Therefore, they'll end up having the same cost recovery goal. The number one reason why we do work in service categories is to diminish social value debates. We want to stop pitting programs and people against each other, right? What's more important, older adults or people with disabilities? What's more important, youth sports or youth swimming, right? Those are the conversations that we've been having, rightfully so, And so really starting to change that verbiage, because I would venture to guess you would say, I would definitely say they're actually all very important to a healthy community, right? They're all very important to the system. These are the service categories. There are 11 of them for San Mateo. I'm going to talk through them in about 10 more minutes, but just so you see them up here, these are the service categories that represent the programs, classes, courses, and events and facilities offered in your organization. All right, beneficiary of service. So beneficiary of service asks the question, who's benefiting? And here would be an example. So we would say that the service area for this example would be aquatics, right? And we would say, hey, so in aquatics, we have different types of activities. We have a learn to swim program, which the young man is representing, and then we have a master swim class. So when we think about who's benefiting, we would say, well, the little boy is benefiting, and there's a greater community-wide benefit because there's things like it's a must-have for us, or maybe there's no level of skill necessary to participate. You can just come, join lesson 1 and learn to swim. Right? It's a must-have. There's more of a universal value. When we look at the master swim, we would say things like there's a higher level of skill necessary. We may say the individual is likely benefiting from this activity more than the community as a whole. We could even say this is a nice to have, right? It's not our sole purpose, but it's a nice to have. So when we start to categorize this way, what happens as there would be a different cost recovery goal for each, right? But we start to see the investment, and we start to talk about things from an investment of the taxpayer dollars and the resources based on who's participating, who's benefiting, and at the end of the day, who should pay. So what we'll be doing with beneficiary of service is they'll be ranked, right? We'll be ranking the 11 service categories based on these two factors. If there's more of a common good, right? More universal value, community-wide benefit, or if they're more individualized in nature, more discretionary, benefits the individual more than the community as a whole. Those will go on this middle continuum after tonight, actually. So this is the second item that you likely have with you. This is the beneficiary of service exercise, and we will get to this in just a couple of minutes. What happens when you'll complete the ranking and then the staff have recently completed it is we'll create a beneficiary of service model. This model will likely speak to kind of the values of the community and this department serving that community based on, again, those two factors of common good or more individualized in nature. And then the third leg of the stool is cost of service. I want to be really clear, when we're looking at cost of service analysis, what we've done is we've taken a full year of data from your team, and we've taken all of the expenses that we could get our hands on, as well as all of the revenues. And so with cost of service, we look at direct cost and we look at indirect cost. So the example is this Easter egg hunt. And this is like the nicest Easter egg hunt I've ever seen. Usually I see lots of parents kind of wanting their kid to get the one golden ticket. But what we often think of with cost with something like this type of an event is the cost to buy the eggs, right? Maybe the prizes and maybe even part-time staff. That's great. We would say those are direct costs. Indirect costs might be things like maybe there's fencing that was purchased so that you could break the kids up by different ages. Maybe there was specific marketing materials created to get people to the event. Maybe there's a recreation coordinator that was responsible for taking registrations or getting sponsorships and donations or placing this in an activity guide, if you will. So we're looking at all of those costs, right? And if we can capture the cost of maintaining the field for this event and getting that ready, that's what we do. We gather everything that we can literally get our hands on. What happens when we put it through this cost recovery tool, if you will, is you'll be able to see the investment literally towards every single program and class for that 12-month period. And it really doesn't matter the way that this tool works. If there's 50 classes that are offered by an organization in a year or 10,000. Once we have that full cost of service analysis, we'll look at the beneficiary of service model. We'll look at how those service categories are ranked, and then we'll do what's called a reveal. We say, hey, here's where you're at for this year. Where do you need to get to? What's helpful for you? And then we lay out 6 to 10 kind of parameters. We call it our reveal, but we lay out 6 to 10 parameters of here's some things you really want to think about and consider as you set your cost recovery goals. And those will be set by service category. A couple of examples, and again, your model will not look like these models because you're just not the same. But I wanted to show you a couple of different models from somewhat recent organizations. This was Oregon City. We worked with them last year. You can see their service categories kind of along that arrow. And then below that, what you'll be able to see is you'll be able to see that they chose to speak with the verbiage of subsidy. Talking about cost recovery in their organization was very new. So they wanted to say, hey, council, hey, staff, hey, community, whomever they are sharing this strategy with, we want to show you where we plan on spending these taxpayer dollars. So we plan on subsidizing community events, right? 70 to 95%. We plan on subsidizing open access. That was things like parks, trails, playgrounds, 95 to 100%. We plan on subsidizing, right, drop-in activities, so on and so forth. As you see, when they get partway up from the continuum, they start to say, hey, our long-term goal is to not be subsidizing these programs and services. So let me be crystal clear. They are not there in 2021. They won't be there in 2022 or likely 2023. They'll start with a couple of categories or a couple of areas and either adjust program operations, right? Or maybe adjust a fee or look at participation numbers, things like that. But what they want to say is like, hey, we don't want to be subsidizing all of these things because we need to recover some costs. We need to be able to reinvest into those things that we're subsidizing at 100%. The second model that I pulled, Channahon Park District, this is a special district, so it is definitely different than a city. However, I wanted to show, again, they have their service categories in the middle. This is how they chose to rank them. They called it a financial sustainability strategy. It has a 2-year shelf life because we recommend that people do the work and then, they'll make some decisions as they get going. 6 months in, pull this out and adjust it as you need. A year in, pull it out, see where you're at, adjust it as you need, right? It should be a working document. You might add programs or classes, you might remove some programs or classes. But at Channahon Park District, what they said was, hey, we're going to offer some subsidies for these types of programs. They get to the middle, and then again, they say, hey, we need to be recovering costs as we move up that. And resale, hey, we don't want to be subsidizing, we don't want to spend tax dollars on things like our concession stands, Farrell's personal food and beverage habits, right? Selling swim diapers, swim goggles, things like that. So we're not going to subsidize those things anymore. We're going to capture dollars and reinvest into our community events. And I put this slide in because I think it shows what I just tried to articulate in case there's any confusion. But as you work through this type of a project, there's often some areas that become profit centers, right? The idea with a profit center is that you can reallocate it into your own system. It's not about making money. You're going to be subsidizing things in perpetuity. That's largely how public parks and recreation systems work. There's also this idea there may be some items to divest, right? I don't know that that's a facility or a program area or just even an expense. We saw a lot of organizations actually in 2020 and early 2021 say, hey, this is an opportunity to divest something that maybe there's a duplication of service, or maybe it was a program that 2 people had been coming to for 20 years and they really need to get 10 people in the room, right? So they're going to combine activities. So that divestment again helps be able to reallocate into the programs and services that they want to be using in the future. And there are a variety of success metrics used as a means to evaluate whether or not our service is compliant and established with its cost recovery goal and meets the efficiencies and the intended outcome, right? It's not always just about the dollar. There's relationships and people and real things involved in addition to dollars. But there are metrics like its financial viability, its operational efficiencies, participant and customer satisfactions, participant and customer impacts. So all of those types of components will go into this decision-making long-term and as you all are creating a strategy in the future. All right, with that, I'm going to hit pause, and that is the end of like my formal presentation about this process before we move into the beneficiary of service exercise. Okay, so the beneficiary of service exercise, if you would go ahead and pull out your service category sheet, and I'm going to talk through it. The intention of this is to make sure that you have a really solid understanding of the title, right, of what the service category is, and then the definition. The examples are there a little bit to help you out, right, and help staff, help everybody out, frankly, as far as, well, what would this really mean, so that you can picture the activity, but really it's the definition. Right now, these service categories are simply in alphabetical order. And so I'll just kind of go through them here one at a time. So advanced activities are classes, clinics, workshops, and other led and or instructed activities in which the primary intent is to advance or master a skill. Examples include rally ball, tennis, Skyhawk soccer drills, skills on the court, basketball, World Cup soccer skills clinics. Beginner activities. These are classes, clinics, workshops, and other led and or instructed activities which the primary intent is to acquire or learn a skill. Examples include junior warrior basketball, soccer, basketball, cheerleading, chess starters, karate 1, intro to beginning, kids love soccer, tot quack soul 1, little dragons, etc. Camps that are contracted. Camps that are operated by a third party and occur during school breaks, such as vacation, and they are intended to provide entertainment for children during these times. Examples include the Bay Area Educational Theater Company, Create, Mix, and Mingle. Childcare. In-house camps that occur during school breaks, such as vacations, and they're intended to provide entertainment for children during the times. During school care provisions for, and facilitated by our own in-house staff. So there's that distinction. Examples include Camp Oak, Camp Mateo, Fall Camp Building Blocks, BKC before and after school care, Bresford Kids Club, Everyday Play, and After School at King. Citywide events. These are large-scale events that appeal to a broad portion of the community regardless of the age, ability, and skill, and family composition. These events are highly intensive and typically occur on an annual basis. Examples include the Summer Concert Series, 4th of July Fest, Movies in the Park, Winter Wonderland, and Day at the Park. Competitive activities. Organized competitive leagues with no guided instruction. Examples include adult softball and adult volleyball. Drop-in activities. Self-directed activities which do not require registration or instruction, but include supervision or oversight by staff and or volunteers. Examples include the rec, lap swim, open gym, pickleball, mahjong, senior movie, senior lunch, ceramics, and open studio. Human services, prevention and remediation of life's challenges. Services designed to assist in maintaining independence and connection to the community by linking and or providing resources for those in need. Examples include the senior get-around transportation services, senior lunch services, and Medicare lectures. Parks and facilities, access to parks, park amenities, and or outdoor recreation facilities, space and facilities for use by an individual or multiple people as drop-in participation. Facilities in which the primary intent is to provide socialization, interaction, and life skills for the betterment of our community. Some examples include the city of San Mateo Park, such as neighborhood parks, Casanova, community parks, the Bresford Park, and sports fields, such as baseball parks, Trinta. Includes regional parks, such as Sugarloaf or Coyote Point. Private and semi-private activities, individualized classes, clinics, workshops, and other led and or instructed activities offered in a private setting to meet the unique needs, interests, and or skill sets of individuals and small groups. Examples include private music lessons, tech tutoring, and private swim lessons. And then rentals, outdoor space and facility and indoor space and facility reservations for exclusive use by an individual or group. So here's the ask for this evening. If you want to grab the beneficiary of service worksheet. And so the beneficiary of service is really just a financial resource allocation philosophy. It provides a foundation for differentiating service based on who benefits and therefore who should pay. This is not a 110% philosophy. Economists have been differentiating goods and services in this manner for decades. Determining the beneficiary of service will become the primary driver in how public parks and recreation organizations will make informed, defensible taxpayer investment decisions. Based on this concept of the service categories, they each have a set of specific characteristics, and they'll start to provide rationale for who should pay. The individual, the taxpayer, to both, and what degree. Ultimately, this aligns how an organization will spend their taxpayer dollars. So here's the two definitions that you're going to utilize in ranking these service categories. The first one is common good. These services are accessible and of benefit to all in the community. They provide universal value. Essentially, these are services that contribute to the common good, and they can be characterized as must-haves. They have a community-wide interest and a far-reaching impact. Individualized. These services provide exclusive benefit to the individual and can include constraints or barriers to access. Essentially, these services benefit the individual more than the community as a whole, and they can be characterized as discretionary or nice to have, with less of a community-wide impact. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be ranking those 11 service categories 1 through 11. The service category that you believe aligns most with the common good, you'll put in space here, number 1. And the service category that you believe aligns most with individualized benefit will go in space number 11. So you'll want to use each service category one time, and then you'll want to use each number one time. One thing that I'm going to remind of is there should be no discussing or thought or function of this idea of funding and fees as you're ranking these. And it will be a little bit hard to do, but what I'll say is anytime the thing is like, oh, how much can they pay, or how much does that cost, or those dollars, anytime that comes into your mind, just during this exercise, we're just going to place it to the side. You will get to include that cost of service, thought process, and analyzation. It's just not tonight's exercise. So with that, if there's no questions, I will stop talking. I'm going to give you about 8 minutes to go ahead and write your rankings on your sheet of your 11 service categories.
Yeah.
Or as a group.
So let me just take a couple seconds, Farrell, thanks.
Great.
We do have 2 members of the public, I think, that have joined, so we might want to go to question. If you all have any questions or comments before we start this process, happy to do that.
Terrific. And should we clarify how we want to go about this process before we go through questions?
I'm happy to do that as well.
Let's do that just so we
okay.
have the context.
Yes, okay. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take the service category paper and you're gonna number these 1 through 11. And then Farrell's gonna ask you about your numbers, and then you're gonna say, you know, I ranked that number 1, or I ranked that number 8 or 9 or whatever, as she's collecting your information. So you'll do the ranking on your own, and then she'll go through each category and ask you how you ranked it. You'll show your fingers. 11 will be 2 1s. And so then she'll take down that information. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
She's just
Okay.
collecting data. We're not trying to get to consensus.
No,
Got
Just
it.
collecting data.
Okay. Wonderful. With that, should we go to commissioner questions then? Commissioner Massey?
Sure, just to clarify that, each of us is going to do this as an individual. This is not going to be done on a group basis at all.
Right, you're gonna do it on your own, and then once the 8 minutes is up for you to do your rankings, then we will ask you all at the same time to give your input for each category. So it kind of doesn't allow you to, you know, persuade someone one way or another. So we'll say advanced activities, and you tell us what you ranked it, whether it was a 5 or a 4, and then we'll collect all that information literally at the same time.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Great. Commissioner questions? Commissioner Wolnick? Can you talk about how these categories were created? Is this something that you as staff did, or is this given by the consultant as these are the categories?
We came up with them as staff. 110% provided some examples, just so we kind of get some to see what others do and how they've done it. but largely we came up with the categories. Initially, we had more than 11, but as we thought and refined it, we came down to 11, and we believe that these 11 pretty much capture everything we do in a separate category with no kind of crossover. So we feel comfortable with these.
And I guess I just kind of want to understand how this will be used at the end. Like if you're thinking of, say, one particular activity and it's in this category, do you ever, I mean, is it flexible enough to be like, okay, this, maybe we should shift it to another category? Or I'm trying to think of it, like what struck me, one of the things that really struck me is like beginning swimming might be a beginner activity, but that's more life-saving than learning T-ball, right? So it seems like there's a little bit of pulling out of certain activities.
Yeah, and I think that as we see the cost analysis and that information and the number of patrons served and that kind of thing, we may want to, change or put things in different categories. So that may be more of a human service because it's a life safety skill that someone's learning. So I think that it's all debatable, but I think there will be flexibility as we move through this process. It's this is just the starting point.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Fields? No questions. Commissioner Massey?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a follow-up to your question. And that is it sort of understood as part of this process that we end up classifying one of these categories with a particular number? That means that every activity that falls into that category is potentially going to be subsidized to the same extent, or is there a point where we drill down into the particular category and say, okay, yeah, there are these 6 things that we actually do that fit into that category, and maybe we do this analysis again within the category. We say, just like your example, well, okay, we've got the beginner activities, but we've got T-ball and we've got swimming. And are we going to say all beginner activities are going to be subsidized 25%, just to pick a number? But are we going to say, fine, that means beginner swimming 25%, beginner T-ball 25%, or are we going to say, wait a minute, beginner swimming, it's a life safety skill. It should be subsidized at a higher level than T-ball. Do we get to do that, or does this analysis stop at the whatever it is I'm calling this here, the service category level?
No, I think we're gonna have flexibility to do that. I don't know if Farrell wants to talk about this at all, the process that's occurred with other cities and the drilling down, but I'm sure that as the cost analysis goes, and there's always usually ranges for subsidized categories. So, a beginner activity may have, be subsidized between, 50 and 75%, and one maybe 50 and one maybe 75. So I think that there allows for some flexibility, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, you're answering it just perfectly. And I really appreciate these conversations and the questions. So yes, there is this thing that what you'll see, that whole category, you'll see all the programs that are in it at the end. What we will recommend is that organizations provide a range. We also know that there's this idea of like the mean, median, and mode within that range. So there will be some outliers. That's really healthy to have. And then you kind of have to have a little bit of a base. The interesting thing about the conversation you're having of, is swimming more or less a life skill than T-ball, or more or less important in your community, should be an ongoing conversation. The purpose of this piece, right, is to just show you where you were for that 12-month period, so that as you make decisions and recommendations, you have a really solid foundation of data to be making those decisions very intentionally. So the questions are spot on, and yes, it will help you with that decision making to know where you're at first. And we would like you to change it. Like, we'll give you the end, and then the goal is for it to be flexible and adaptable to speak more to your community's needs once you see where you're actually at.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I think one other question though, just in terms of process, you talked about the three-legged stool, understanding patron served and the rest of the data, which I think is going to be super important. That comes later, correct? Okay.
Yes, it does. We're still analyzing it right now, but in the next few weeks, we'll have that and then we can start matching it.
Right.
Correct.
Tremendous.
This one will come back to you again.
Got it.
This is the first step.
Great. So with that, Gio, should you open it up to public comment?
At this time, we only have one attendee. Care Health, and there are no hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay. And we can keep going. Should we do the,
Yes, unless
Retreat
you have
now?
any comments that you want to make before we start, happy to have any additional feedback prior to the process, but I think 8 minutes for you all to do your rankings and then we'll ask for your rankings. Thank you.
Just a glass of water. second.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, it's
Nice
nice
of you.
and the festive peak.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so I think it does it.
Oh, I've been ready.
Good,
for a while.
okay, good. I think we're set. Oh, okay.
Are you ready or do you need some more time?
We're ready.
All right, let me stop sharing for 1 second so I can see all big. Okay. So I will start at the top of the list. I'll see in alphabetical order, and as staff mentioned, if you would just hold up for me for a minute until I say, but like where you placed that, so what number you placed next to that activity, I will capture that on my end. So advanced activities. Thank you. Beginner activities.
Higher math.
I know, you haven't had to do this in a long time. Okay, thank you. Camps contracted. Thank you. Childcare. Thank you. Citywide events. Nice, thank you. Competitive activities. Thank you. Drop-in activities. Thank you. Human services. Thank you. Parks and facilities. All right, thank you. Private and semi-private activities. Done. Gotcha. You're good. All right, and then rentals. Nine, thank you. Okay. Great job, you all passed. No, so here's what's gonna happen. Yay! So here's what's gonna happen. It is kind of fun to see kind of where people land in their thought process a little bit. There we go. What will happen after tonight? I think she mentioned it, but just so we're clear, is you know, we haven't started your strategy yet because you're just doing one of the most important pieces tonight of ranking your categories. But what will happen is I did this same workshop with the staff, and then I've done the workshop now with you. And so I'll be creating a beneficiary of service model. And the way that I'll do that is there will be a staff model, a commission model, and then a hybrid model. And what I do is I add your numbers together and then I divide by 4. So it creates this average. And so I'll be sending back likely by the end of this week, kind of those 3 models. And I'll see it's really encouraging how aligned often the staff are with a commission or an elected body or volunteer body. So thank you for serving and speaking up on behalf of your communities. So we finished the exercises tonight. We'll create the beneficiary of service model. Staff will determine which model we'll be moving forward with. If any adjustments are needed, and to your point, if there's adjustment needed in a category, maybe an example or a word that wasn't clear, it's not uncommon to like do a little bit of refining after the process. The cost of service analysis continues. Once we have that data, again, we'll be doing the reveal with staff in the next few weeks here, and then helping them talk through ideas that they have as they go ahead and set the cost recovery or subsidy goals. So all of those things will be coming to fruition, and then you know, staff certainly bring you back in the loop and kind of let you know what those next steps are. So with that, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you, Joanne and Nicholas, for bringing this forward. We always encourage people to include their Parks and Recreation commissions or, you know, volunteers, stakeholders, whoever they can, so the community knows what's going on. So kudos to you all for stepping up and wanting to really create your department great for the future. So thank you all tonight.
Thanks, Farrell.
Thank you.
Great. Should we go to commissioner comments then? Commissioner Field, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I was very pleased to see that we all agreed that Parks and Facilities were number 1. That was a nail biter. No, but no, this is actually it's kind of a fun activity. It's an interesting framework of common good to be individualized. Certainly, there were a few categories that I'll say I personally struggled with. I'll just say rentals, I think was one. In part because I think it's a really important benefit, but I'm not sure how much it really matters all that much. I mean, I've rented picnic space, and I'm not sure if, you know, it's a nominal fee, I don't know, $25 or something. And I don't know, you know, if we charged $50, would I still do it? Probably. Would that be cost prohibitive? Maybe, and then I don't love it, but I don't know. There were certain categories where I think, you know, as we started to hear the conversation here, kind of start to get into the details of, well, how does this play out? What does it look like? We do really want, of course, all of our children, we didn't want to prioritize or deprioritize certain things. You know, of course, we want all kids to know how to swim. Certainly, I found myself thinking about who benefits, and I do really appreciate the framework. I don't know, like citywide events, I ranked pretty high up, and yet I think there are certain revenue generating things that we do in our citywide events that make them sort of universally accessible, but also there's opportunities if someone wants to buy food and drink versus bring their own, things like that, that I just want us to bear in mind as we move forward. But again, I really appreciate the framework, and I thought this was a fun activity. Thanks for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Commissioner Walnick. Yeah, I second that. I like the way that we're starting to think about this. I think this is really, really good, not just for Parks and Rec, but for just cities in general. And I like the framework, especially because people, I think, especially now, we're having trouble seeing where our dollars go in city services, because a lot of it seems hidden. And I think this is a really good way to sort of say, you know, we as a community are prioritizing this. So I agree, there was some, I mean, they're broad categories, right? And we have examples, we don't have all of the specifics. So there were some things I struggled with just because I thought, well, is this really in this category or is this really in that category? So, but I don't think it really, you know, makes something a 1 or an 11. It kind of makes it a 5 or a 6, right? So I also appreciated this. Yeah. Commissioner Massey?
Okay. Yeah, I agree. This is a good starting point. As I said earlier, I do have some question about how this gets applied as we get down into the detail. Because I think we are going to come up with, within each area, with sort of value judgments that we're going to have to make. And it may be that doing this using ranges is a way to approach that problem. But if the ranges are too big, it sort of negates the exercise. So it will be interesting to see how that pans out. It also occurred to me as we were going through here, the 3 areas in particular: human services, childcare, and the camps, which are really another form of childcare. And that is, you know, these are things that are really, they are absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, at the very top of the must-have list. Are they things that are of benefit, you know, to all in the community? I mean, you could take a segment of the community that would say, well, if you don't have children, then you don't use these things. And so I think some of these goals potentially are going to come to conflict as we go forward. And that's something we need to keep in mind too. But overall, yeah, I think this is a worthwhile exercise and a good starting point.
Agreed. I'll just echo what everyone else said. I'm glad that we're setting out priorities and that we have a baseline just to have something to kind of look at and refer to as we go forward. I mean, that if you want to track improvements and track investment, you have to have that baseline. Otherwise, it can be a black hole. I found it a little bit difficult to rank these. It feels very subjective without having the data, right? Because it may completely change when you understand really how many lives does it impact, or what is the level of investment. So I think that'll be interesting to marry those two up, and then it will be a really great process. And I think the other challenge, which I always just reflect on, is how do we, Farrell, to your point, make sure that we're educating the community and that expectations are aligned. Because I think that's going to be super important with this as well. Anything else? That's it. Great. Yeah, thank you. And Farrell, thank you again for your presentation. That was great. Good. The next item on the agenda then is reports and announcements.
So I just have a couple of things that I want to go over with you. This evening, we had our 100-year celebration of Central Park last month. I can't believe it was last month. And I just wanted to kind of recognize all the people that really pitched in and helped to make this event go. And that includes our Parks and Recreation staff that maintain the park, as well as, you know, programmed this event and organized everything. And our Public Works Department that assisted, as well as our city manager's office. And really, we had an event planning committee that really pulled a lot together for this event. And that was made up of retirees Jan Busa, Sheila Kanzian, Joan Diskin, and then we had 3 other members that are city staff: Samantha Weigel, Erin Fellers, and Patrice Olds. So I just really wanted to recognize all of them for playing a part in this great event that we were able to do this year, and that I am so happy that I got to be a part of. Wanted to let you all know our winter guide has gone online, and so that is up and available for access. Our ice rink out at Central Park has been installed or is still being installed for the next few days. And I believe opens officially on November 11th, Friday, November 11th. Yes. And then our Winter Wonderland will be on December 3rd. So that will happen before our next meeting. So I just wanted to mention it to get it on your calendars. And that's really it. Thank you. Great, that we're adjourned.
Oh, I have
Oh, I'm
one.
sorry.
This Saturday, the local team of the Bicycle Coalition is having a free bike repair event at the King Park. So there are signups online through Eventbrite. You can find it through Eventbrite if you want to pre-register, but we will take walk-ins as available. And we have a lot of mechanics this time, so I'm super excited. We've so far between our two events have fixed over 100 bikes. So we'll see what we do this week.
Awesome. Oh, one more. Oh, sorry. Actually, did you want to circle back to do the,
Yeah, so
minutes.
just because Pearl struggled with hearing us, I think we should maybe just do at least the consent calendar item again, now that we know the recording and the audio is working. So if you're okay with reading that?
yeah. So motion to pass the consent calendar?
So it's approval of the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, approval of minutes. Motion to.
So moved.
And I second.
Okay, and I'll do a roll call vote. Chair Massey? Oh,
Aye.
sorry.
Aye.
Commissioner Walnick,
Aye.
Commissioner Fields,
I abstain, I wasn't at that meeting.
thank you, and Chair Health.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion is passed.
Did you have
Okay.
something too?
Yeah, I wondered if you could give us sort of the 30-second update on how we're doing with Central Park and also East Hillsdale Park. We've got playground improvements
Sure.
underway in both places.
Yes, they are. And we're working through moving from design development to construction documents with Central Park Playground specifically. We are in construction documents at East Hillsdale Park. So they're both kind of similarly situated at this point in time. So which is really exciting because construction documents means you'll be digging dirt soon. So, you know, I think anticipated construction for both of those projects will be late next year. So, so that's good news. So they're tracking well. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's about, you're saying late next year, that's about a year from now.
Right, yeah. By the time the documents are prepared, that we go out to bid, we,
Yeah.
you know,
no,
get
no, I
a contract
know
and then
that-
break ground. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know the drill. but
Yeah.
I just
Breaking
wanted-
ground by next year at this time.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
In that case, we're really adjourned.
Thank you.